Welcome back to the flow of the universe, where light and darkness are not opposites, but two breaths of the same truth. Tonight, we speak of a silent traveler, a piece of matter lost in ancient laws. Its name is 3I Atlas, a visitor from beyond the solar system, bearing questions that science has yet to answer. It not only traverses space, but also seems to touch the depths of our own consciousness. Let your mind slow down. Hear the universe whisper to itself, starting from the moment 3I Atlas wakes up. For the first time, humanity noticed it in early 2024, a faint glimmer hidden in the data of the Atlas Observatory in Hawaii. Weeks later, astronomers realized that what they were seeing didn't belong here. The object was moving on an open trajectory, not orbiting the sun, not bound by any classical gravitational curve. It came from beyond the solar system, and one day it will leave again, but not before leaving behind questions that silence even the boldest physicists. Early measurements revealed that 3I Atlas emitted strange reflective pulses, neither ice nor dust, and at times it brightened rhythmically, as if adjusting its own reflectivity. Some scientists said it was rotation, but the rate of change was uneven, sometimes fast, sometimes paused, like a body that was breathing. Then it began to release water, at a distance far too great for sublimation to occur naturally. At 9 astronomical units, nearly 3 times the Earth-Sun distance, water was still evaporating, as though some internal energy source was at work. Scientists called it a non-gravitational effect, a subtle thrust caused by gas jets escaping unevenly, nudging the object off its predicted course. But what baffled them was how stable that deviation was. Not chaotic, not random, as if every shift were being calculated to the second. In NASA's control rooms, the graphs flickered with delicate oscillations, a deviation of 0.012% per day, then 0,01%, then perfectly constant for 3 weeks straight. Something natural or not was steering 3I Atlas with chilling precision. By late September, the first papers appeared in the Astrophysical Journal. The title was Cautious: Unusual Early Activity of Interstellar Object 3I Atlas. But between the lines, the careful reader could sense hesitation. Scientific language was becoming guarded because no one was sure whether they were describing a comet or something else entirely. Across observatories in Chile and Spain, telescopes swept the sky each night, searching for signs of decay or a shift in orbit. But 3I Atlas remained silent. No explosion, no fragmentation, no disappearance, just a steady motion, deliberate, persistent, almost conscious. Astrophysicists at Harvard compared it to Oumuamua, the first known interstellar object discovered in 2017. Yet there was a crucial difference. Oumuamua simply passed through, but 3I Atlas seemed to interact. It responded strangely to solar radiation. Its rotation speed shifted exactly when it faced Mars, and its brightness peaked whenever the red planet stood between it and Earth. A perfect rhythm, a kind of synchronization that nature rarely performs. When the news broke, the internet erupted with theories. Was it an ancient probe? A device collecting data on our solar system? Or just an improbable coincidence of physics? But that night, in a quiet corner of the Lowell Observatory, a scientist named Maria Lawrence recorded something that silenced everyone. Over 14 hours of continuous observation, sensors detected an electromagnetic oscillation of 11.2 hertz, coming from the direction of 3I Atlas, a frequency eerily identical to the Schumann resonance of Earth, the planet's own natural heartbeat. Was it interference, or an answer from something ancient in the dark, remembering the rhythm of this world? In that silence, the universe did not reply, but neither did it deny. Only the light kept flowing, and 3I Atlas continued on its path, slow, steady, like a distant heartbeat, pulsing within infinite night. When an object drifts through the void, it doesn't just pass through space. It passes through the memories of worlds. 3I Atlas has left the frozen dark beyond the edge of the solar system, where nothing remains but interstellar wind and the pale shimmer of distant suns. It moves through ancient dust, the remnants of stars that died long before humanity ever opened its eyes. From Earth, it appears as a faint speck of light, but in the emptiness, it glides with uncanny precision. Not fast, not slow, just steady enough to suggest that perhaps it's listening. Each time sunlight brushes its surface, 3I Atlas reflects it differently, not merely as a mirror would, but as if adjusting the brightness of its own being, at times strong, then dim, sometimes yearning to be seen, then sinking back into stillness. Scientists call it photometric variation, but something within that rhythm keeps them transfixed. A pulse, steady and organic, like a heartbeat, like the breath of a sleeping giant, drifting through the dark. And then it glows. Not dazzling, not sudden, just a soft light spreading like mist. Telescopes record the rise in brightness, steady, rhythmic, as though the object were inhaling and exhaling. Some think of chemical reactions, others call it coincidence, but those who watched night after night began to feel something deeper, a quiet intuition that what they were witnessing was not mere matter, but a kind of intention. At NASA's control center, the numbers flow like a stream. Data, frequencies, luminosity, vectors, all logical, yet each slightly off, just enough to unsettle. The deviations form a pattern, a hidden logic, as if something deliberate were guiding the noise. No one dares use the word intelligence. It's too heavy for science. They simply say, there's something about the way it moves, a modest phrase for a deeply human unease, the suspicion that it knows it is being watched. From an observatory in Chile, the light of 3I Atlas veers slightly, then returns to its original course, as though testing the reaction of its observers, a motion too subtle to be called chance. That night, the sky itself seemed to be listening. Astronomers stopped speaking in data and began to speak in feelings. One of them wrote in a notebook, "I don't know why, but I feel like it's waiting for something." Waiting for what? No one knows. Perhaps sunlight, perhaps a frequency only it can hear, or perhaps us. Sometimes, the universe's greatest mysteries do not need answers. They only need to be felt, like an open question, sent from a place where time never existed. 3I Atlas drifts past Mars, calm, silent, but beneath its frozen shell, something moves. Not machinery, but memory. A memory so ancient that even light slows down to listen. And in that silence, for the first time, humanity sensed something strange, that perhaps the universe is not merely being observed, it is observing us. At the edge of Mars's orbit, 3I Atlas began to stir the familiar streams of data. No noise, no spectacle, just the quiet shift of numbers, as if the planet itself had felt a breath pass over it. On the red surface below, the robotic stations kept sending signals back to Earth. Amid the usual lines of indifferent code, tiny deviations appeared, temperature rising by mere thousandths of a degree, pressure trembling, and the thin ion layer above Mars glowing brighter than before. No one understood why. No solar wind, no eruption. Everything happened precisely as 3I Atlas slipped past the planet's edge. In orbit, the Trace Gas Orbiter noticed something odd. The water vapor content doubled in 2 days. A small fluctuation in theory, but enormous for Mars. On a world so dry, even a thin breath of moisture is enough to awaken sleeping chemistry. Scientists debated. None dared make a claim. No physical mechanism made sense, except the unsettling possibility that 3I Atlas was influencing its surroundings. The object did not touch the planet with mass, but with a field, an unseen zone of influence, as if testing whether an ancient world could be awakened. During its closest pass, Mars's surface temperature rose slightly, and the light reflected from its dust turned faintly blue. Such a thing had never been recorded. Mars lacks the atmosphere to scatter blue light. That night, a soft azure band rippled along the northern horizon. Through its infrared lens, the Perseverance rover captured it, a gentle radiance, flowing across the sky like a planetary breath. NASA never released the images. The report simply noted, transient luminescent event cause undetermined. But those who had once watched auroras on Earth recognized the pattern. A Martian aurora, a magnetic resonance between planet and something beyond. That something, of course, was 3I Atlas. From 21,000 kilometers above, it drifted by in silence. No signal, no change of course. Yet it left behind an electromagnetic trail lasting 300 seconds, oscillating between 8 and 12 hertz, the exact range of Earth's Schumann resonance, the planet's natural heartbeat. One physicist wrote in a private note, "If this is coincidence, it is the greatest coincidence in the history of observation, because in the universe, coincidences rarely repeat, and once a pattern gains rhythm, we call it language." Leaving Mars's sphere of influence, 3I Atlas drifted away, and the red planet seemed to wake from a long dream. Pressure rose, methane signals sharpened. Deep in the seismic data, a faint tremor echoed like a pulse. Planetary biologists exchanged glances. Was something answering back? Mars has long been called a dead world, yet these vibrations reminded them of early Earth, when molecules first learned to connect and life began to name itself. 3I Atlas merely passed through, but its presence made an entire world sigh. In the days that followed, many said it was just a comet, an ancient block of ice, unraveling in sunlight. But those who believe the universe remembers felt something different. 3I Atlas wasn't merely moving, it was listening for rhythm. testing which worlds still hear its call. And that night, across the cold Martian desert, within the faintly glowing air, a feeling spread like breath, as though the cosmos itself whispered, "I'm still here. I just wanted to know if you're still awake." Not every movement in the universe is meant to travel. Some are meant to listen. After leaving Mars, 3I Atlas kept its course, yet no one saw it as a mere object anymore. In the minds of those watching, it felt less like a celestial body and more like an intention drifting through space. Earth kept spinning, lost in numbers, signals, and the noise of life. But on quiet nights, the sky seemed a little heavier, not from gravity, but from something that was now looking back. Astronomers didn't say it aloud, but they knew, after Mars, the next waypoint for 3I Atlas would be Earth. The distance was still vast, yet the numbers always drew closer. And somewhere deeper in the human mind, a strange thought arose. If the universe truly holds memory, then perhaps each planet is a cell in that cosmic consciousness, and 3I Atlas might be the signal traveling between them. It did not come to destroy, nor to invade. It merely touched the rhythm of each world, gently reawakening a long-forgotten memory. Some researchers called it interplanetary resonance, a scientific name for something far simpler. When two beings share the same frequency, they begin to understand each other without words. In those days, people began to speak of a strange synchrony between Mars and Earth. Dust storms on Mars and monsoon winds on Earth rose at the same time. The ionospheres of both planets vibrated in matching cycles, and even light itself, supposedly indifferent, seemed to hum along quietly. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps it was the universe communicating with itself. Humanity, the observer, stood between two worlds, one still full of life, one almost lost, and 3I Atlas, drifting silently, was the bridge between memory and the will to continue existing. Some philosophers called that moment the still point of cosmic consciousness, the instant when the intelligence of life and the memory of matter met through a silent glance. Perhaps, in this endless expanse, every planet can listen. Most have simply forgotten how. 3I Atlas seemed to remind us, life is not defined only by biology, but by resonance. Anything that can still align, in rhythm or in thought, is still alive. On Earth, people looked up, each seeing something different. To the believer, a sign. To the scientist, data. To the poet, a story. Yet all eyes turned to the same faint point of light. And in that moment, the whole of humanity unknowingly fell into sync. A brief silence, small but vast enough for the universe to listen. 3I Atlas drifted on, leaving Mars fading in the cold and turning toward the next world. No one knew what it carried, only that wherever it passed, everything living seemed to remember once more that it was part of something greater. As 3I Atlas drew closer to Earth, the atmosphere began to respond, even before its light had time to arrive, not through anything dramatic, but through changes so subtle, only instruments could detect them. The planet's magnetic field quivered faintly, a thin, even vibration, like the Earth's heartbeat slowing by a fraction of a second. Weather satellites called it ionospheric interference, but those awake in the stillness of night felt something else. A calm presence seeping into the air, as though the planet itself were waiting to hear a sound. Data from the observatories kept streaming in: plasma density, radio frequencies, light reflection, all normal. Too normal, stable in a way that felt deliberate. Across Europe, several researchers noticed Earth's new oscillations aligned exactly with the frequencies recorded when 3I Atlas passed Mars. No one dared to declare it a pattern, yet everyone sensed the same thing. It was getting closer. On moonless nights, infrared telescopes caught its dim reflection, a slow, steady point of light, moving with a precision that felt almost cautious, as if it were keeping tempo, to avoid disturbing the quiet fabric of space. No sound, no trail, just presence, so subtle it could be mistaken for a hallucination. Meanwhile, people began to dream the same dream, dreams of water, of red skies, and strands of light floating through space. Psychologists called it collective coincidence, but the dreams multiplied, in perfect rhythm with 3I Atlas's approach. Children in Iceland, elders in Japan, astronauts in orbit, all described the same sensation: a soft light and a low hum, like wind brushing the surface of a lake. Some said 3I Atlas was transmitting a signal, but perhaps it wasn't sending anything at all. Perhaps it was simply there, and its very presence was enough to alter how the planet responded. High in the air, ocean winds shifted slightly. Oceanographers noticed wave intervals, off by a few milliseconds from predictions, tiny, meaningless deviations, yet too synchronized to dismiss as chance. These vibrations caused no harm. If anything, they brought balance. Storms dissipated faster, winds softened, and the planet's average temperature dipped slightly, as though an invisible hand were tuning Earth's rhythm to match a larger symphony. During those days, many people found their minds quieter, heartbeats slowed, breathing deepened, and there was that faint sense of being watched. Not by intrusion, but by understanding. Neuroscientists labeled it the global sensory synchrony effect, a sterile term for what others called the universe listening to us breathe. No one knew what 3I Atlas was doing. No data, no transmission, only its silent drift, slow, calm, like a moving memory. Some said it was recording. Others said it was teaching the planet to hear itself again. Either way, Earth was no longer the same, not changed by catastrophe, but by stillness, a stillness so profound, no one dared to speak loudly for fear of breaking something unfolding beneath language itself. And in that moment, as humanity looked up, everything felt smaller, slower, quieter, as if the planet and every mind upon it were listening together to a music only the universe knows how to play. Since 3I Atlas entered Earth's sphere of influence, a strange stillness spread like an invisible wave. No shock, no surge, just the slow, steady rhythm of something connecting. Human beings began to feel it before they could name it. Some dreamed of light falling gently onto water. Others heard a low hum, a tone belonging to no known instrument. The dreams spread like mist, soft, slow, without beginning. Across the planet, electromagnetic signals wavered in the same narrow band. Seismographs, radar, radio waves, all swayed to a single pulse, too faint to draw attention, yet strong enough that the sensitive few felt the world shifting beneath their skin. Some spoke of their hearts sinking with Earth's own rotation. Small storms broke apart faster. The seas grew calmer. Time itself, though still moving, seemed to hesitate for half a breath. In the great cities, people began to look up, not searching for the object, but for the feeling. Something out there reminded them they were once part of a greater whole. Some called it planetary empathy. Those who simply watched called it awakening. It was not 3I Atlas speaking. It was Earth replying. The air, the oceans, even human bodies vibrated in the same frequency, as if the planet were trying to speak again after millions of years of silence. In laboratories, scientists searched for physical explanations, but over time, they too grew quiet, not from lack of evidence, but from realizing every equation led to the same unspoken truth. There was an interaction that science had no name for. NASA's magnetic field maps showed the planet's poles undulating like waves. The distance between north and south rose and fell like twin heartbeats, and within that oscillation, a faint echo could be heard, tiny but rhythmic. No one knew if it was sound or just the mind's reflection, synchronizing with the planet's pulse. But everything softened. Noise felt less harsh. Light turned gentle. The world seemed to inhale together. Some said it was psychological, a mass response to the incomprehensible. But the listeners, the quiet ones, knew they weren't imagining it. They were remembering. Deep within our awareness, we all carry Earth's original rhythm. When it changes, we change. When it quiets, we rediscover the silence we lost. 3I Atlas didn't need to act. It simply was. And that was enough to draw us back into harmony. A few nights later, astronomers in the southern hemisphere reported its reflected light dimming, not vanishing, just no longer needing to be seen, as if it had completed its purpose, to awaken the planet and remind its children that they were always part of it. In the breath of night, the sky returned to calm. No signal, no message, only a lingering sense that somewhere, out in the vastness, another heartbeat still echoed, and somehow we had just heard it. Since the arrival of 3I Atlas, no great upheaval has taken place, but small things have begun to change, quietly, almost imperceptibly. People find it easier to breathe, easier to be calm. The worries that once pressed on them seem to drift more slowly, as if the world itself has been gently drawn back into balance. No one can explain why. Scientists insist there's no evidence that 3I Atlas affects the planet. But on a deeper level, the level where emotion perceives before reason, everyone senses that something has shifted. Children sleep more soundly. Elders rise earlier, just to look at the sky. And in the most ordinary moments of life, a subtle feeling passes through everyone. The feeling of being seen, not by eyes, but by a distant consciousness. Something observing without judgment. It only remembers, the way an ocean remembers every wave that ever touched its surface. Some people speak less now. They have learned to listen, and in that silence, they hear themselves again. Not thoughts, but the resonance of life itself, the pulse that existed before language was born. Elsewhere, research teams still record data, but their fascination with answers has faded. The more they measure, the more it feels like staring into a mirror, and the reflection is not data, but a question. What makes us want to understand the universe? Perhaps that is the true influence of 3i Atlas. It turns inquiry inward. Questions grow gentler, freed from the gravity of fear, and take on the wonder of curiosity. The gaze of a child seeing the world for the first time. The earth keeps turning, but some can feel its rhythm more clearly now. The trees, the tides, the wind, everything seems to move within the same long breath, drawing humanity back toward the center of life, the place where all is silent, yet nothing is dead. 3i Atlas is still out there, drifting farther, growing smaller, a grain of memory leaving our field of sight. But what it left behind is not in orbit. It's within the mind, in how we perceive the world. After realizing that perhaps the universe perceives us as well, no one knows if it will return. But maybe that no longer matters, because in the brief moment it passed by, we remembered what we had forgotten, that life's purpose is not only to exist, but to listen. At last, 3i Atlas departed from Earth's orbit. No flash, no trail, just a fading spark dissolving into the dark. Telescopes traced its retreat, silent numbers scrolling across screens. So calm they felt almost merciful. No deviations, no anomalies. Everything returned to normal, at least in the data. But in the places numbers cannot measure, everything had changed. Before we continue, if you're still here, still listening, leave a small sign in this vastness. A like, a subscription, not for algorithms, but for the quiet dialogue between you and the universe. Because somewhere on the other side of this planet, someone else might be watching this same video, hearing the same slow heartbeat of the stars. People went on with their days, waking, walking, speaking, laughing, yet between the familiar beats of life, there was a new stillness, a thin space, where one could hear the heart's rhythm blending with the planet's breath. Most no longer remembered what 3i Atlas was. Months later, it became an old headline, a minor entry in astronomical archives. But for those who once felt its pulse, the echo remained. They said that sometimes, when the night is still enough, one can hear a faint sound, like metal touching water. And in that instant, every memory of fear, of limits, of humanity's isolation melts away. Some call it psychological residue. Others say it's a sign of higher awareness. But perhaps it needs no name, because it wasn't 3i Atlas that did anything. It was us. Watching it depart, we finally saw ourselves. In the dark, Earth keeps turning, keeps breathing, sending gentle vibrations into space. Somewhere out there, another object might be listening. Perhaps the universe is resuming an unfinished conversation between matter and consciousness. And if so, 3i Atlas was only a greeting, a soft knock on the door of awareness, reminding us that everything is alive and waiting to be heard. That night, as our planet slipped quietly along its orbit, the sky dimmed to the pale glow of aging stars. Among those countless lights, no one could say which one had been 3i Atlas, and perhaps it no longer mattered, because what mattered was not where it went, but what it left behind. A breath, a listening, and a question that never fades. In all the motion of the cosmos, how often do we truly stop to hear ourselves move? Before we begin, if you're listening to this, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, not to follow a name, but to keep that fragile thread between you and the universe unbroken, because somewhere, in another corner of the night, someone else might be listening too, breathing in time with you. 3. I Atlas was discovered at a distance of 4.4 astronomical units, farther than Jupiter's orbit, so cold that ordinary physical processes nearly stop. Out there, sunlight is little more than a dying breath. Temperatures fall below 220 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze every known gas, cold enough to lock any comet into a centuries-long sleep. But 3I Atlas did not sleep. It switched on. NASA's Swift telescope recorded the first reflected emission in late March 2024, a faint jet of gas escaping from its surface, as though the object were awakening itself. The rate of outflow reached 40 kilograms per second, an impossible number at that distance. By every rule, at 4.4 AU, sunlight cannot melt ice. Ordinary comets only begin to sublimate near 2 AU, about twice as close. But here, 3I Atlas not only outgassed early, it did so steadily. Spectroscopic data revealed that the gas was not just water vapor. It contained carbon dioxide, 8 times more abundant than H2O, a ratio that defies nature. In normal comets, water dominates the mix. Here, CO2 overwhelmed it, as if the object were wrapped in an artificial shell, or somehow regulating its own evaporation. Cautious scientists called it an anomaly, a quiet way of saying, no model fits. In confidential ESA reports, one theory appeared briefly, then vanished. That 3I Atlas might contain layered internal chambers, pockets of isolated gas functioning like a self-regulating propulsion system. If true, this would make it something more than a comet, a device engineered to operate autonomously in the frozen dark of space. Its velocity was measured at 38 kilometers per second, fast, yet perfectly stable. No vibration, no wobble. Astronomers compared it to a bullet in space, yet its calm precision was what unsettled them most. All comets wobble under asymmetric gas jets, but 3I Atlas did not. It moved as if it knew where it was going and how to keep itself precisely balanced along the way. ESA's data showed a trajectory deviation of only 0.004%, 10 times smaller than the average error margin for comets at that distance. A near-perfect precision. That was when scientists began using the phrase early activity, no longer just a frozen rock reacting to sunlight, but a self-initiating system, as if something inside it carried a signal, a pre-programmed command, to awaken at this exact point. Why 4.4 AU? No one knows. Some say it lies in the delicate region where Jupiter's and Mars's gravity fields intertwine, the perfect place to test navigation. And if 3I Atlas was not a comet, but something built to learn, then 4 AU was where it opened its eyes for the first time. From there, it began venting in steady rhythm, adjusting its orbit ever so slightly, and heading directly toward Mars, a planet that once held water and perhaps still remembers life. Scientists called it the activation phase. In the language of living things, one might call it simply awakening. After its activation at 4.4 AU, 3I Atlas did not fade or weaken. Instead, it maintained a steady outflow of gas, as though it had found its ideal rhythm. The jet streams were so stable that many scientists began to suspect the object was holding itself in space, not drifting randomly, but balancing each minute force to stay precisely on course. No one called it control. No one dared speak of intention. Yet everyone felt there was a hand unseen or programmed, working quietly from within. 3 weeks after the first emissions were recorded, 3I Atlas settled into a stable orbit around the Sun, gradually closing its distance to Mars. It no longer behaved like a lost wanderer. It resembled a deliberate signal, moving through layers of space, as though tuning a frequency. Images from the Subaru telescope showed 3 distinct jets venting in different directions, cycling every 26 hours, a rhythm curiously close to Earth's rotation period. Some called it coincidence, but those who watched longer noticed. The precision was flawless, not a second off, no fluctuations, like a machine long dormant, now quietly running through familiar routines. The exhaust was too consistent, its thermal output too even, forcing NASA's sensors to recalibrate, unable to distinguish between natural reflection and deliberate emission. In her report, astronomer Francesca Loy wrote simply, "No comet in recorded history has shown this level of stability. All fluctuate except this one." A cold remark, carrying the weight of something unnamed. At 4.1 AU, another anomaly appeared. Its speed did not decrease, as normal inertia would dictate. It did not accelerate, nor did it slow. Something was keeping it in perfect equilibrium. Some compared it to a gravitational glider, an object using planetary gravity to travel without fuel. But in this case, Jupiter was too far away to generate such an effect. In other words, 3I Atlas was flying free, influenced by nothing but itself. At the Deep Space Network, engineers tracked a series of rhythmic light pulses, dim, bright, fade, repeating in a perfect cycle, matching the rotation of Mars. Not early, not late. It was as if the object were measuring, comparing, calibrating. If someone or something was controlling it, they were listening closely to every signal echoing from the red planet, preparing for a new phase. Model simulations revealed something unsettling. If 3I Atlas maintained its current trajectory, it would pass directly through a magnetic intersection zone, a gravitational silence where the forces of the Sun and Mars cancel each other out, a region of near-perfect stillness, the ideal place to test a navigation system or to initiate something else. No one spoke of it publicly, but in confidential reports, a phrase began to appear: activation point. And this lever with handoff to men at the lugger, and with him, a place perhaps, where this object would finally do what it was built to do. From that moment on, its journey no longer seemed orbital. It looked like a sequence, a test of precision, each step measured, patient, deliberate. The way it vented exact, the way it rotated smooth, the way its light pulsed perfect. Every movement carried the grace of foreknowledge. And while humanity debated physics, the object continued to drift, slowly, steadily, as if it had known the entire map of the solar system for a very long time. Between the orbits of Jupiter and Mars lies a peculiar region known as the gravitational silence zone. It is where the pull of 2 massive planets converges, creating a stillness so profound that even light seems to slow as it passes through. 3I Atlas entered that region in early June 2024. No dramatic event, no flare or burst, only a subtle change in its reflected signal. The light grew softer, its brightness dipped slightly, and its reflective structure began to rotate, like a body learning to adapt to a new environment. At the control centers, data feeds displayed gentle oscillations in reflection intensity, not error. Not interference, but rhythm, a steady 12-minute cycle, followed by silence, then repetition. Astronomers called it a photonic feedback pulse, a rare phenomenon seen only in objects with crystalline surfaces or engineered materials. If 3I Atlas were merely a comet, it should not have been capable of this. Some analysts noticed something stranger still. Each pulse of light matched subtle variations in the solar wind, not as a reaction, but as synchronization, as if the object knew in advance from which direction the particles would come and adjusted its brightness to minimize their impact, a behavior almost like defense. In that part of space, nothing moves quickly. Even photons take over 30 minutes to cross the zone. Yet 3I Atlas drifted through steadily, its speed unchanged, its path unwavering, as though passing through an invisible gate. Veteran observers described it as a blink of the cosmos. Next we see, with planes and not in the score, a moment so brief one could miss it. Yet afterward, the object was somehow different. Its luminosity dropped by 4%, its surface temperature rose slightly, and its polarized reflection shifted, evidence that its outer layer had restructured. No one knew how, but it seemed 3I Atlas had learned to soften its surface against sunlight. In the following days, sensors recorded faint magnetic ripples spreading around it, not strong, just enough to disturb surrounding dust, weaving delicate spirals, like wisps of smoke circling a quiet flame. At mission control, no one spoke. There was no known mechanism by which a comet could generate a stable magnetic field. This was not randomness, but purpose, a test, an adjustment, as if the object were gauging its ability to interact with space itself. The June 6 report contained a short note. 3I Atlas exhibits magnetic light harmonics. No further explanation was given, but those who understood knew what it implied. The object had changed the way it reflected energy, as if aware that it was nearing the influence of an atmosphere-bearing planet. From that point onward, every motion of 3I Atlas felt like preparation. Its spin grew smoother, its velocity steady, its trajectory tilting gently downward, a slow, deliberate descent toward Mars. It moved as though bowing before entering the realm where life once breathed. Telescopes described the scene simply. It glides through space in perfect silence. All external forces appear nullified. Out there, the universe seemed so still, one could almost forget it was still in motion. But within that stillness, 3I Atlas appeared to be the only thing thinking. It sent no signal. It merely changed its light. Slowly, steadily, the quiet respiration of ancient metal warming in the cold. And within that silence, scientists no longer saw an object. They saw behavior, a thing that could adapt, that could dampen its reactions, that could stabilize its energy when the solar wind grew fierce, that could orient itself toward the one place still capable of reflecting its light, Mars. From here on, the journey of 3I Atlas was no longer a matter of physics. It had become a question. If matter can learn, then perhaps the universe can remember. And perhaps objects like 3I Atlas are the way that memory travels between the stars. A few weeks later, 3I Atlas reached the edge of Mars's magnetic field. No one expected anything unusual. The red planet's magnetosphere is little more than a faint remnant, a breath from its forgotten past. Yet the moment it entered that zone, the object began to glow again. Not a flare, but a quiet, steady shimmer, a pale silver tinged with red, like sunlight diffused through iron dust. The same dust that once covered Mars billions of years ago. Its brightness oscillated in a 24-hour, 37-minute cycle, perfectly synchronized with a Martian day. No one knew how, but somehow 3I Atlas had tuned itself to the planet's rotation. A lifeless, mindless object, without sensors or transmitters, was now behaving as if it were listening to a rhythm. At mission control, its light curve drew a heartbeat on the screens, each pulse matching Mars's turn, and with every revolution, the glow grew slightly stronger. There was no longer any doubt. 3I Atlas was responding to the planet's magnetic field. Astronomers called it induced photonic reflection, a cautious term, a way to avoid writing interaction, because to accept that word would mean accepting awareness. In the days that followed, its color began to change, from silver to deep crimson, then back again. A flawless cycle, an ancient, deliberate signal. A few researchers secretly ran spectral analyses and found that the frequency of the red light matched the natural radio waves emitted from Mars's northern pole. Two energy sources, one planetary, one interstellar, were resonating, then dissolving together into space. No collision, only interference, the harmonious kind. Within the quiet boundary of the magnetosphere, two entities, one alive, one inert, were speaking a language beyond sound. From Earth, observatories detected its rhythmic flicker, like an ancient Morse code. But the message was not for us. It was for Mars. Some said it was activating something. Others believed it was a natural resonance, the way crystals hum when they meet the right frequency. But beneath all those theories was a quieter intuition that 3I Atlas was remembering. Perhaps within its icy core were atoms that had once passed through this region, millions of years ago, and now, returning, they recognized the vibration of home. In the realm of matter, memory does not exist in words. It exists in frequency. An electron may forget its shape, but it remembers how it once vibrated. If the universe has memory, then 3I Atlas was touching its deepest layer. On the monitors, tiny points of light appeared around it, charged dust drawn into a thin orbit, forming a perfect halo, motionless, a quiet crown in the dark. No one called it artificial activity, but everyone understood. This was no random reaction. Something inside was awakening, slowly, anciently, and with absolute awareness of where it was. At the same time, plasma waves began radiating faintly from 3I Atlas, rippling along Mars's orbital path, gentle as a pulse. Not strong, but far-reaching, as though the object were touching the planet, without ever touching it. In the silence of space, everything seemed to pause. No radiation, no noise, only the steady heartbeat between two bodies, one of soil, one of ice and dust, both circling the sun, in perfect synchrony. If someone out there were watching, they might have called it resonance, the moment when two fragments of the same cosmic memory find each other again and realize they were never truly apart. After completing its passage around Mars, 3I Atlas began to drift beyond the planet's sphere of influence. There was no sudden motion, no acceleration, just a slow lifting of its orbit, as though it wished to leave without making a sound. Yet the strange thing was this: when the object departed, the light around Mars remained, a faint halo hovering above the planet's thin atmosphere. like the lingering breath of a conversation between two worlds. From orbital stations, the data showed that this weak glow persisted. For more than 12 days after 3I Atlas had gone, no one could explain why. No energy source remained. No plasma emissions, only a pocket of space, slightly warmer than its surroundings by a few degrees. Some physicists called it residual ion friction heat, but those who had watched long enough knew friction couldn't produce such perfect synchronicity. Each pulse of light kept the exact rhythm of Mars's rotation, as if the planet had learned how to sustain the dialogue on its own. No one knew how far 3I Atlas had traveled, but the final reflected signal was recorded, 1.3 astronomical units away, still aligned toward Mars, a distance too vast for any natural echo to survive, yet still, it did. A faint thread of light, appearing only when Mars returned to the same position in its orbit. It looked like a repeated farewell. No voice, no message, just memory waving softly. From Earth, observatories detected weak oscillations in the ionosphere, coinciding with those faint glimmers. A chain of resonance between two planets, linked by an object already gone. Perhaps 3I Atlas never truly left. Perhaps it left behind the most delicate part of itself, a frequency, an echo. People began to call it the planetary afterglow effect. Not real light, but the sense that Mars still remembered, as though the planet had stored a blurred imprint in its magnetic field, and that memory was now rippling outward, reaching any world still capable of listening. On Earth, certain instruments began registering the same faint interference. Not strong, just enough to touch the sensors, drawing a subtle, steady waveform. Scientists cautiously named it interplanetary resonance, a careful phrase because no one wished to say outright that Mars and Earth were communicating. Yet, whatever they called it, the phenomenon remained stable, rhythmic, as if both planets were breathing in unison. Some believed 3I Atlas was only a catalyst. It hadn't created the rhythm. It had merely awakened the one already written into the fabric of the cosmos, like someone tapping gently on the surface of a lake, and the water, remembering its song, begins to sing again. Then, slowly, the faint Martian glow faded, not abruptly, but gently, like a candle dying in an empty room. And yet, on Earth, many still claim that on the quietest nights, when the wind is still and the sky perfectly clear, they can see a distant light, one not found on any star map, and for a brief moment, the world seems to fall back into rhythm. No one dares to confirm it is 3I Atlas. No one needs to, because sometimes it's enough just to know that the universe is still responding. From beyond Mars's shadow, where 3I Atlas had faded to a wandering speck of light, the universe shifted, almost imperceptibly, not through sound nor through gravity, but through a subtle pulse, rippling through space, until it brushed against Earth. A lingering breath from a conversation that had ended, but not yet gone silent. No one noticed at first. Just a few flickers in instruments, a minor tremor in the ionosphere. Then, gradually, the change seeped into familiar things, into tides, into wind, into human sleep. Fishermen along quiet coasts said the sea had grown gentler. Waves no longer struck with their old impatience, and the fish came closer to shore, as though the ocean itself were listening to something far away. On land, meteorologists began logging a strange calm, the wind resting longer on moonless nights. The air felt thicker, yet somehow easier to breathe, as if the atmosphere itself had learned to rest. Biologists soon noticed another anomaly, a faint synchronization between human heartbeats and the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic rhythm, not constant, but recurring. On days when the planet seemed more awake, the two beats aligned. No one could explain it. No theory held tight enough to name it. There was only the sense that the world was concentrating, as if it had turned its attention inward. Sensitive minds described a low hum, a deep undertone of the cosmos. It did not sound. It was felt, somewhere between skin and thought. Some dreamed of the same scene, a red desert, a drifting light, and a strange certainty that they had once been there. They didn't speak of it aloud, but all knew they were dreaming of Mars. Maybe imagination, maybe neural resonance, but the precision of it was uncanny. Dreams repeating, spreading from person to person, like inherited memory without a language. Scientists called it cognitive synchronization, a sterile term for what others began to call shared memory. Earth, it seemed, was remembering with Mars, and 3I Atlas, though long gone, remained the invisible bridge between the two worlds. No more signals, yet electromagnetic ripples still appeared each time Mars turned its face toward Earth, like a silent call, with no voice, only two listeners breathing together. If life is a chain of responses, this may be the most delicate one humanity has ever witnessed. One planet that forgot, one planet that dreams, and a distant traveler reminding them that once they breathed as one. From above, Earth still blazed with light, but within, a quiet spread, slow, steady, like the pause between two verses of a song. Some said 3I Atlas had sent a message. Others believed it merely reawakened the frequency the planet had always carried. But those who truly heard said nothing. They only listened, because in that moment, it felt as though the universe itself had paused to see whether we still remember how to speak with our own soul. And so 3I Atlas drifted farther away. No more reflections came back, only a dim trace dissolving into the black fabric of space. No one knew where it was heading, but even its aimless path felt strangely purposeful, as though it somehow knew the way home. For every world it passed, that world awoke, then fell silent again, as if in thought. Mars still glimmered faintly in the distance, while Earth, small, blue, spinning in its familiar rhythm, began to feel less alone. Even without sound, the universe seemed to be speaking to it, not in words, but in presence, not in signal, but in rhythm. Perhaps 3I Atlas had not come to teach, nor to send a message. It merely drifted through, and in that motion, left behind a silence vast enough for us to realize how long it had been since we last listened to the world. In the stillness of the cosmos, every planet keeps its own beat. Mars breathes through dust, Earth through water, and 3I Atlas through the empty spaces between stars. When its final glint vanished, a strange awareness remained. Not sorrow, but recognition that all things that exist are listening to the same music, a music no one remembers composing. Astronomers dimmed their screens. Scientists stopped writing. The entire world paused for a heartbeat, as though waiting for a final note that never came. And perhaps that was the true legacy of 3I Atlas, a silence deep enough to let us hear ourselves. Far away, a new point of light appeared in the dark. No one knew whether it was a star, a newborn comet, or merely the echo of Three-Eye Atlas's memory, but every gaze turned toward it, as though the universe had just blinked, reopening the story, an ancient tale of connection, of remembrance, of worlds that once knew how to listen to one another. Mars was never truly silent. Even after Three-Eye Atlas had long departed, the planet continued to emit faint tremors. Not strong, not clear, but steady enough for instruments in orbit to record subtle movements in the space around it. Some said it was interference. Others called it after-resonance, a physical echo lingering from its last encounter. But those who listened long enough felt that Mars was doing something. Its thin, fragile atmosphere was shifting. Pressure rose slightly, carbon dioxide levels dipped, and traces of microwater vapor, long thought extinct, began to return. Too small for casual notice, yet for a dead planet, it was the first breath in ages. In orbit, NASA's MAVEN probe detected plasma streams, moving in strange directions. Instead of scattering, they converged toward the poles, as if some unseen force were drawing energy back into the planet's core. A few scientists suggested that Mars might be attempting to realign its magnetic field, a process last active billions of years ago, extinguished when its core cooled. If true, then somewhere deep inside, a spark still waited to be rekindled. No one dared claim Three-Eye Atlas was the cause, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Every shift began the moment the object left orbit. From Earth, infrared telescopes observed a pale halo circling Mars's northern pole. Not bright, just a faint blue shimmer, like moisture glinting through frost. Models showed the region's temperature rising by mere thousandths of a degree per day. Slow, deliberate, but consistent. A process with structure, as if the planet were learning to warm itself again. One physicist noted simply in her report, "No natural phenomenon sustains this level of stability." Very Dillony and dated, a quiet sentence, but enough to make anyone pause. For sometimes, the most stable things are the traces of design. Mars, though silent, might be under observation, or perhaps it was doing the unthinkable, reactivating itself. Around it drifted the remnants of billions of plasma particles, tiny as memories, floating freely through space. If they were the residue of Three-Eye Atlas, then each one was a fragment of code, and Mars was the ancient processor, beginning to run an old program again. A program about atmosphere, about water, and perhaps about life. From Earth, it looked merely like a red world, glowing a little brighter than before. But for those who listened, Mars was speaking, in the only language the universe still understands, the language of return. As the first light of dawn slid across Mars's northern pole, the satellites in orbit noticed something unusual. The ice no longer reflected sunlight as before. Instead of shining bright, it dimmed, as if the light were being drawn inward. For decades, the Martian polar caps had been static, their icy plains unchanged, silent, predictable. But now, infrared sensors showed a subtle reordering. Layers of solid carbon dioxide were melting unevenly, as though being warmed from beneath, patch by patch, with uncanny precision. Scientists labeled them sublimation pockets, gas chambers that form naturally as frozen CO2 evaporates. Yet this time, they weren't random. They appeared in a lattice, a geometric grid spanning more than 500 kilometers. Nothing in nature works that cleanly. It looked as though an invisible hand, was redrawing the structure of the ice, slowly, deliberately, with impossible patience. When the new thermal map appeared on their screens, several atmospheric physicists fell silent. They could see it. The warm points spiraled outward, rotating in the same direction as the planet's spin. An ancient pattern re-emerging from the dust. The first question whispered through the room. Is Mars generating its own energy? Its core, long thought dead, had cooled into dormancy. No convection, no magnetic field. But now, seismic models showed a new vibration, faint, rhythmic, like the last heartbeat of a body stirring from long sleep. No impact, no solar flare, just the quiet sense that something deep beneath the surface had switched back on. NASA made no public statement, but within the internal report, a single sterile line appeared. Subsurface energy source, undetermined, stable oscillations within natural variance. The phrasing was standard, but between those words hung a silence. The shared thought everyone avoided saying aloud, what if this isn't just physics? In the control room, an older scientist finally broke the quiet. If this planet remembers, he said, then it just opened its eyes. Mars's thin atmosphere thickened slightly, not much, but enough for the suspended dust to linger longer in the air, casting an amber haze that stretched across the equator like an ancient fog, stirring after eons of sleep. Back on Earth, the images arrived, and the world fell silent. Mars no longer looked dead. It looked like a planet, trying to breathe. If 3I Atlas truly left something behind, perhaps it wasn't energy, but memory, the memory of motion. And that alone was enough for a world to remember its rhythm. No one knew how far it would go. Maybe it was temporary, or maybe it was the beginning of a new cycle, a cycle in which Mars learns to live again. That night, as the last tendrils of plasma faded above the pole, the surface still glowed faintly, weak but pulsing. There was no doubt anymore. The planet was responding to the void, not with language, but with breath. In the following days, the orbital stations around Mars began detecting strange oscillations. They came from deep beneath the red soil, a place that should have been nothing but frozen rock. At first, no one believed them. The signals were too faint, barely above the noise threshold. But then they repeated. Every 19 hours, a soft pulse spread outward from the planet's northern hemisphere. Not strong, not sharp, but steady, like the heartbeat of something ancient. Each tremor lasted exactly 16 minutes, then fell silent, only to return with the next cycle. No geological model could explain it, and in the stillness of space, everyone knew something was moving beneath the red stone. One scientist wrote in her private notes, "It could be thermal movement, but it feels far too precise to be natural." No one argued, but no one wanted to say it aloud either, because too precise is not a phrase one uses for a dead world. From the first fragments of data, a pattern emerged. Temperatures 50 kilometers below the surface were rising slowly by 0.002 degrees Celsius per day, a number so small it should mean nothing. Yet on a planetary scale, it hinted at the return of internal energy, not mere warming, but circulation. If Mars truly still held an active core, then this slow resurgence of heat was like blood stirring again in a body after a centuries-long sleep, a quiet, rhythmic, patient awakening. Planetary geophysicists began to use a new phrase, regeneration pulse, not because it proved life, but because it behaved like a living rhythm, From orbit, MAVEN recorded faint plasma waves, synchronizing with the underground tremors. Every time the subsurface pulse appeared, the upper atmosphere rippled in reply, very slightly, as if two layers of the same body were breathing together. Some called it planetary resonance, but every definition felt too small for what was unfolding. If 3I Atlas had done something to Mars, perhaps it hadn't brought energy, but left behind a frequency, a spark to awaken motion in the planet's deepest memory. From Earth, scientists noticed another anomaly. Each time the underground pulse appeared, Mars's reflected light brightened slightly, as though the planet itself were glowing from within. Too faint for the human eye, but strong enough to make infrared sensors recalibrate their range. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew a planet was trying to live again. The pulse continued in steady intervals, slow, patient, spreading warmth through rock layer after rock layer. With each passing day, the tremors grew more consistent, as if the circulatory system of a long-dormant body was rebuilding itself. If anyone were listening, they would say Mars was learning how to breathe. Each passing day, the tremors beneath Mars grew a little stronger, not in sudden bursts, but like a breath stretching deeper with every inhale. The orbital stations reported subtle changes in the planet's thin atmosphere. The winds, once chaotic and isolated, were now forming slow, steady currents, too directed, deliberate. Near the poles, the red dust began to rise, but instead of dispersing, it coiled into gentle spirals, lingering for hours in the air. It was as if the atmosphere itself was being stirred from within. Planetary meteorologists named the phenomenon vortex laminaris, the smooth vortex. But as they reviewed the data, it became clear these whirlwinds weren't random. They formed symmetrical spirals, patterns too exact to be coincidence, as though Mars was trying to speak through the language of motion. This was no longer a reaction. It was rhythm. It was structure. It was memory. Magnetic sensors aboard the orbiters detected corresponding waves, rippling through the upper atmosphere, each pulse arriving precisely every 19 hours. The same cycle as the subterranean tremors, separated by kilometers, yet in perfect synchronization. A scientist wrote in his notebook, "No doubt anymore Mars is communicating with itself, and the wise was where Kribblin tell." In space, a thin layer of plasma began to form around the planet. Not a storm, just a veil of faint light, drifting like mist, moving in orbit with Mars around the sun, a quiet halo for a world waking from long dormancy. From Earth, it appeared only as a dim glow, within the red-orange band of the spectrum, but through the largest telescopes, observers could see its slow pulse, not bright, not fast, simply steady. And that, perhaps, was what made it terrifying and beautiful at once. Life re-establishing order, without a sound, without words. On calm nights, when Mars climbed high in the sky, and Earth's atmosphere was clear, some claimed to see the light with the naked eye. A red point, not still, but quivering, breathing slowly. Across observation networks, strange electromagnetic signals began to appear. Some devices caught faint surges, matching Earth's Schumann resonance, as if two planets were exchanging whispers. Across hundreds of millions of kilometers, no one dared announce it, but those who knew simply exchanged silent glances. Deep down, they understood. If Mars could respond, then the universe was no longer alone. And at the edge of biology itself, those distant vibrations seemed to reach the human mind. More and more people dreamed the same dream: an orange sky, a frozen land warming beneath the light, and a feeling impossible but unmistakable that they had once been there. No one could explain why, but somehow the collective consciousness had begun to synchronize with the new rhythm. There was no data, no proof, only a hush spreading across the world, as if humanity, without realizing, was listening. Mars continued to pulse, each beat a quiet declaration that life does not only dwell in organisms, but in planets themselves when they remember how to move. And somewhere far away, Dry Eye Atlas kept drifting, dark, unresponsive, perhaps still listening. In the weeks that followed, the signals around Mars changed dramatically, not on the surface, but in the thin space surrounding the planet. The streams of solar wind that once swept through the region began to slow, not by much, but enough to create a pause, a kind of silence. At the edge of its fragile magnetosphere, high-energy particles started to deflect, as though encountering an invisible barrier. Several orbiters recorded a sharp drop in radiation flux. No one knew why. The planet's thin atmosphere hadn't thickened much, but its interaction with interplanetary space had changed. It was behaving like a body, learning to close its eyelids against a sudden glare. Physicists called this the reactive field effect, a dry term for something almost sacred. Mars was beginning to defend itself. The plasma sheath surrounding the planet started oscillating in steady cycles, a soft, regular rhythm that sent faint waves outward from the surface, then back again, like arms folding into an embrace. No one understood the mechanism, but every measurement pointed to the same conclusion. Mars was forming an energetic shell. It wasn't a magnetic field like Earth's, but a layer of weak electrostatic resonance, vibrating at a stable frequency, just strong enough to push back the solar wind without dispersing. On the energy maps, the red planet looked like a heartbeat pulsing in the dark. Each emission spread a little farther before dissolving into space, delicate but perfectly ordered. A young scientist murmured during a briefing, "It's like it's trying to learn how to breathe underwater." Only, in a vacuum, the room fell silent, not because the remark was bold, but because it was too accurate to dismiss. If the planet was truly learning to regulate the flow of energy around itself, then this was the first stage of atmospheric regeneration, a process slow but self-sustaining, capable of taking centuries. From Earth, observatories noticed that Mars's light had softened, no longer a blazing red. It shifted to a deep crimson mixed with blue, as if veiled by a thin mist. Infrared telescopes confirmed it. Water vapor levels had risen by 3%, and carbon dioxide had slightly decreased. No one wanted to believe it, but the data was undeniable. Mars was doing what no dead world had ever done. It was rebuilding its atmosphere. In NASA's control room, an analyst whispered, "Maybe 3I Atlas didn't bring life. It only reminded Mars how to live." No one replied, but every gaze turned to the screen where the red planet spun slowly in the black. If the atmosphere truly could regenerate, the question was no longer how, but why. Why now? Why, after billions of years of silence, had a planet suddenly remembered how to shield itself? There were no answers, only a shared intuition that somewhere in the void between orbits, a fragment of memory was spreading, and the planets were whispering to each other in a language humanity had yet to learn. Perhaps the universe was rewriting the way it creates life, slowly, gently, and this time, it had begun with Mars. Ever since the energy shell formed around Mars, everything began to move differently. The planet was no longer a cold, silent sphere. It was behaving like a body, regaining sensation after a long sleep. Within its thin atmosphere, tiny ice dust particles started to drift, not blown by wind, but gliding slowly, with direction, as if guided by a hidden current beneath the air. In the sunlit regions, sunlight lingered longer than before. The planet's surface no longer reflected it harshly, but absorbed it deeply, as though the soil itself was softening, preparing for something to come. Thermal readings showed a steady temperature rise near the equator, not enough to melt ice, but enough to produce water vapor. Faint streaks began to appear along the walls of ancient canyons, short but unmistakable. On the orbiters, the data was replayed hundreds of times. No one dared to believe. They were witnessing what science had once declared gone. Water, not frozen, but suspended in the air. Some whispered that it was the first hydrological cycle. Mars learning again how to evaporate and condense, like the lungs of a body, taking its first breath of life. At the South Pole, thin clouds began to gather. Not dense, not lasting, but forming and dissolving with the rhythm of day and night. A fragile breath, but a real one. The scientists stayed silent, recording only. Upper atmospheric vapor origin undetermined, cyclic pattern observed. Those final two words, cyclic pattern, said everything. This was no transient phenomenon. It was a process in motion, a chain of interactions among gas, heat, and rock, as if the planet's memory had been reactivated and was now functioning again. Plasma sensors detected a shift in the direction of the solar wind. It no longer struck Mars head-on, but curved slightly to either side, as though being deflected by a new aerodynamic layer. For the first time in billions of years, the planet could say no to the sun's wind. From Earth, spectrographic images showed the southern pole growing faintly brighter, with a blue tint, not from light itself, but from the reflection of melting ice crystals. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. It was the signature of liquid water. Not much, only a thin mist clinging to stone, but it existed. For a fleeting instant in cosmic time, a planet that had once died was becoming wet again. Veteran observers said that on thermal monitors, Mars now resembled a heartbeat. Each time the solar plasma brushed against it, the planet responded with a soft glimmer, a natural reflex, like the body breathing even in deep sleep. No one called it a miracle, but in science, the moments that render people silent are often exactly that. As the water vapor spread, a question began to surface. Was this only a temporary reaction, or the true beginning of a new atmosphere? No one could answer. Only one thing was certain. Once a planet begins to make water, it begins to make memory. And memory, once awakened, does not easily fall asleep again. Over the next several months, the changes on Mars became undeniable. Not life, but movement. Small, deliberate shifts, enough to make humanity believe the planet was truly returning to itself. Water vapor continued to rise. Thin veils of cloud began to hold light a little longer. When darkness fell, the surface cooled more slowly. Not by much, only a few percent. But on Mars, that difference marked the line between death and a fragile breath. Then, something happened that had never been recorded. Within the thin atmosphere, tiny droplets began to form, too light to fall, yet heavy enough to exist. Microscopic droplets, visible only to radar, hovered and shimmered like mist touched by sunlight. The observatories called it plasma rain, not true rain, but the condensation of water vapor among ionized particles. Yet in its motion, there was something eerily familiar, something that felt like memory. Those minuscule drops descended, touched the ground, and vanished instantly, leaving faint traces of moisture on the surface. A world once desiccated had remembered the sensation of water. No one celebrated. No one claimed discovery. Only silence filled the control rooms, because everyone understood. For the first time in billions of years, Mars had wept. On Earth, observatories detected synchronized interference, a weak signal precisely matching the moment of the micro-rain. There was no explanation, only perfect coincidence, as if, when one planet exhaled, the others inhaled in return. A scientist wrote quietly in his notebook, "Perhaps planets aren't just made of stone. Perhaps they remember each other." No one answered. None was needed. Because in that pause, they all understood. 3I Atlas hadn't simply passed through. It had left behind a frequency of movement, of life, rediscovering how to turn from within. That night, the Martian sky glowed softly, no longer the harsh red of dust, but a muted amber hue. Veils of mist curled through the canyons, catching the dim reflection of the setting sunday. No one could see it clearly, but within those shadows, something had begun to flow. Not a river, but the memory of water finding its way home. Mars was no longer silent. Its atmosphere, still thin, had begun to hold the light. On the longest nights, when the sun was nothing more than a dim star on the horizon, the planet glowed faintly, as though a fire deep within it had never truly gone out. The microscopic rains continued to fall and fade like dreams. Yet each time, a trace of moisture remained, sinking deeper into layers of rock that had slept for billions of years. No one knew how long it would take before liquid water truly flowed again, but everyone knew. The process had begun. From Earth, telescopes recorded a change in Mars's reflection. The once fiery red softened into amber tones, and sometimes, when sunlight filtered through the newborn haze, the planet shimmered with the faintest hint of blue. Not enough to call it an ocean, but enough to remind us that every world can remember what it once was. An old scientist sat quietly before the monitor, speaking so softly it sounded like he was talking to himself. Maybe 3I Atlas didn't come to change Mars. Maybe it came to ask if the planet still wanted to live. Somehow, that question reached Earth. During the days when Mars changed color, people across the world reported sleeping more deeply. Their breathing slowed. Their dreams grew gentler. No one knew why, only that the space around them seemed to breathe too. Perhaps when one planet learns how to live again, the others find a new rhythm of their own. And if life is the echo that travels between worlds, then Mars had just played the first note of a new symphony. Soft, distant, but clear enough for the entire cosmos to hear. That night, 3I Atlas was already far away, a dim thread of light among the stars. But before vanishing from sight, it seemed to leave one final signal, a faint infrared oscillation, matching the Schumann resonance of Earth. No one announced it, but those who knew understood. It wasn't a farewell. It was a reminder. Listen, Mars, once called a dead world, now glowed like a slow-beating heart in the dark. Not because life had returned, but because the will to live had never left. Perhaps life doesn't begin with biology. It begins the moment a world remembers that it was once part of the universe and starts to breathe with it again. Some things feel too ancient to be called legends. Clay tablets from Sumer, over 5,000 years old, speak of visitors from the sky who arrived when the heavens changed color. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, and the object that came with them, a strange planet, was said to orbit the sun every 3,600 years. They named it Nibiru. For millennia, those inscriptions were dismissed as myth until 3I Atlas was discovered, an interstellar object following an elongated, stable elliptical path around the Sunday. Its full orbital period remains uncertain, but strangely, when astronomers modeled possible trajectories, the estimated cycle hovered near one number 3,600 years. Coincidence or memory? Some say it's chance, but history has a way of repeating itself, whether we believe it or not. For when 3I Atlas appeared, the sky once again glowed faintly red, just as the Sumerians described Nibiru, a blazing star passing among the planets, carrying the breath of change. This was IS. In the Grayton, no one dares claim 3I Atlas is Nibiru, but when numbers align so precisely, people begin to wonder, have humans witnessed this before and recorded it in a language now half forgotten? Among the Sumerian texts lies a curious verse. When the star of Anu returns, the ground will remember the old teachings, and water shall flow from the dry places. A simple sentence. Yet, read today, as Mars begins to release vapor, it silences even the most skeptical. Perhaps the ancients didn't know of orbits, but they knew how to observe. They saw, they remembered, and they spoke in words we now call myth. But if the universe itself remembers, then myth may simply be the language of cosmic memory, told through human breath. High above, 3I Atlas continues its departure, and with each pass through the inner system, it seems to carry the same quiet question: were humans truly the first to write down the story of the cosmos? When humanity saw 3I Atlas, we called it a phenomenon, but when the Sumerians saw something similar, they called it a return. In their ancient carvings, they wrote that Nibiru was not a planet in the usual sense, but the star of transit, a wanderer between worlds, appearing every 3,600 years to awaken the memory of heaven and earth. Of course, that's mythology, but the number 3,600 still haunts anyone who studies those tablets, not because it's neat and whole, but because it reappears across civilizations that never met. The ancient Egyptians called their cosmic cycle Zep-Tepi the first time. Their ones of Retherwaner to start the Kondout, a celestial rotation lasting roughly 3.5 millennia, marking each age of light and shadow. The Maya spoke of the cycle of the red sun, an orbit spanning thousands of years, when light from the north shall pass through the Sunday. No culture knew the others, yet all wrote of the same image: a red luminous body crossing the sky, heralding both beginnings and endings. Today, 3I Atlas is described by cold precision: velocity, mass, albedo, trajectory. But in myth, those same parameters were written as emotion, fear, reverence, and what the Sumerians called the memory of the cosmos. No one can prove that 3I Atlas and Nibiru are one and the same. Yet the cyclical resonance between them invites the question: perhaps every 3,600 years, the universe sends a reminder to those creatures still capable of looking up. And if so, then maybe history isn't the past. It's a loop, returning each time in a new disguise. Science today, myth long ago, but always from the same source. Perhaps that's why the Sumerians described Nibiru with unsettling accuracy, its position between the orbits of Jupiter and Mars, and a dim glow rising from the southern sky, the same direction from which 3I Atlas was discovered in 2024. Maybe we are not merely observing the heavens, but walking once more in the footsteps of our ancestors, those who gazed upward and felt something beyond language. They had no telescopes, but they had memory, and perhaps that memory was written into our very DNA, because every time an object like 3I Atlas appears, we look up the same way, with the same quiet recognition, as if we've seen it before. On the Sumerian clay tablets, the word Anunnaki appears again and again, not as the name of a god, but as a title, those who came down from the heavens. According to the ancient texts, they were not mere symbols. They were beings who arrived with Nibiru and departed whenever that wandering world returned. In the great cycle of the cosmos, the question has never gone away. How could a civilization 5 millennia old write about travelers between worlds? They had never seen a comet, never known of orbital mechanics, and yet they described the periodic reappearance of a red star in the sky. They wrote that when Nibiru arrived, the sky trembled, the ground breathed, and water rose from stone, a familiar image, for that is what happened to Mars when 3I Atlas passed near. In the Enuma Elish, one line stands out. The star of Anu opened the gates of the earth, and rivers rose from the red dust. Modern linguists dismissed it as metaphor, a poetic description of the flood season. But now, as new data reveal Mars' awakening, that metaphor begins to sound like a record. Perhaps the ancients did witness a similar event, a world stirred back to motion by a visitor from beyond. If so, then the Anunnaki may not have been gods, but memories of an ancient intelligence. Returning in cycles, the universe itself calls the times of return. Other tablets describe them as beings in human shape, yet wrapped in light. A curious phrase, one that mirrors what modern instruments recorded around 3I Atlas, a thin plasma halo pulsing with steady rhythm. No one dares call that intelligence, but within such descriptions lingers something deeply familiar, a way of speaking about light that moves, touches the ground, and departs without leaving a scar. If 3I Atlas is the first such object we have seen, then, for the Sumerians, it may have been the 10th or the 100th, an old visitor to Earth, recorded in sacred language by those who could only name what they felt. Another tablet contains a single cryptic line. They come when their star touches the fire of the sun and leave when the earth remembers how to breathe. Once thought to be poetry, it now sounds eerily like a description of energy cycles, much like the way 3I Atlas activated at 4.4 AU, emitting steady outflows along its orbit. If the Sumerians witnessed something similar, they described physics through metaphor, and we, thousands of years later, translate metaphor back into equations. Perhaps the Anunnaki were never beings at all, but the personified name of the object itself, of 3I Atlas, of Nibiru, of a luminous entity capable of awakening worlds. In the ancient world, anything extraordinary became divine. In the modern one, anything inexplicable becomes physics. But between those two interpretations may lie only two languages for the same intelligence. If that is true, then the Sumerians did not write myth. They wrote history, told in the only way people who knew less about the universe could ensure the story would survive long enough for us to remember it. When archaeologists began comparing Sumerian, Egyptian, and Babylonian texts, something uncanny surfaced. 3 civilizations, separated by thousands of kilometers, speaking entirely different tongues, all described the same phenomenon: a red star crossing the heavens, bringing transformation to water, earth, and humankind. The Egyptians carved its image on the temple walls of Abydos, calling it the child of the sun, an object from afar whose appearance coincided with the Nile's reversal of flow and the time when the gods walked among men. The Babylonians named it Mul-Mul, the star of intersection. They wrote that it did not move in a straight path, but in a spiral orbit, always returning after 3,600 years. When scholars compared the recorded epochs of these intersections, the spacing between them truly did hover near that number. Every 36 centuries, one age ended and another began. Archaeologists stopped calling it coincidence, because the deeper the comparison went, the more deliberate the pattern appeared. In the Sumerian text Enki and the Order of Earth, it is written that each time the star of Anu passed, the mind of humankind was widened. It marked eras when people learned again how to build, to write, to remember, by many deceivers for one doxes. The Egyptians recorded a matching age, when divine teachers showed them how to measure the sun's shadow, map the stars, and predict the Nile's flood with astonishing precision. No one can explain why, but every time the red star returned, humanity seemed to awaken, not in spirit alone, but in cognitive evolution. Perhaps it was mere cultural overlap, or perhaps an astronomical event truly impressed itself upon all 3 civilizations, leaving a resonance in collective memory. Now, as 3i Atlas glides across the sky, human beings once again look upward, measuring, writing, and asking the same quiet question: haven't we seen this before? Some researchers have begun linking ancient data with modern orbital simulations, aligning the estimated return of Nibiru with the projected path of 3i Atlas. The result, though unprovable, is chilling. The 2 trajectories nearly overlap, differing by only a few degrees. On the plane of the ecliptic, no one claims certainty, yet a new hypothesis whispers into being: that the red stars of ancient records were not planets at all, but self-directed interstellar objects, capable of activation, navigation, and return, a kind of cosmic envoy, sending periodic messages to the species that watches the skies. If so, then the arrival of 3i Atlas is not random. It may be part of an ancient mechanism, a program woven into the architecture of the cosmos, to remind us, each time we forget, you once knew how to look up. And perhaps we are not merely observing 3i Atlas, but being observed in return by the same intelligence that once taught the Sumerians to carve words, the Egyptians to raise pyramids, and the Babylonians to read the light of the sky. If that is true, then every return of the red star is not only a moment of advancement, but a test to see whether humanity still remembers how to be worthy of the light. Among the relics unearthed in the ruins of ancient Ninurta, there lies a small clay tablet, believed to be Sumerian, that archaeologists now call the star map of Enuma. It shows the sun at the center, surrounded by 12 perfect circles, each connected to the middle by a thin line, as though marking orbits. 4 of the circles are noticeably larger, and at the very edge, A small ring sits tilted out of the plane, as if representing a traveling body, cutting across and beyond the solar system. For thousands of years, it was dismissed as religious symbolism. But when modern telescopes charted the planets, scientists fell silent. The match was uncanny. 12 celestial bodies, including Earth, Pluto, and one more object far beyond the rim, the one the Sumerians called Nibiru. No one understands how they could have known. They could not see Pluto with the naked eye, nor even conceive of a solar system. Yet the engraving, its proportions nearly perfect, depicts a view as though seen from outside the system itself, just like 3i Atlas. Some modern scholars now believe that the symbols around the diagram are not names of planets, but numerical codes, markers of frequency or orbital period. If so, the Sumerians did more than draw a map. They recorded the rhythm of each world's motion. And the outermost body, Nibiru, bears the number 3,600, a full revolution, a cycle of return. No one knows where they learned this. They had no instruments, no telescopes, and no reason to imagine a system that matches ours so precisely, unless they weren't observing from Earth. One hypothesis dares to say, if the Anunnaki truly came from there, and the Sumerians merely copied what they were shown, then the Enuma tablet wasn't drawn by humans, but by those who once saw the solar system from beyond it. A gentler theory suggests something older, that the Sumerians inherited fragments of knowledge from a predecessor civilization, one erased by catastrophe, its science fossilized into myth. Their tablets, then, would be the last echo of an ancient astronomy we no longer recognize. Whichever version you choose, the carving refuses to be forgotten. It doesn't merely show the sun. It shows a curve, cutting through all the orbits, the path of a wandering star, a curve almost identical to the estimated trajectory of 3i Atlas. If that's coincidence, then the universe has a poetic taste for repetition. But if it isn't, then perhaps the Sumerians weren't recording history at all. They were sending a forecast, a message buried in clay. When the star returns, the world will change, and in the final wedge of cuneiform, barely legible but still there, one line remains. When that star comes again, humankind shall remember that it was never alone, a promise or a warning. No one knows, only that when 3i Atlas passed by, something ancient stirred within us. Intuition, memory, wonder, all turning toward the same direction. The place the Sumerians named Nibiru, and we now call the origin of the question. For centuries, humanity has spoken of the Anunnaki as gods, yet in the oldest Sumerian tablets, not a single line calls them divine. They are described instead as those who carry the flame of understanding, arriving from a star with a 3,600-year orbit and departing only when the Earth learns how to speak to the heavens. Read quickly, it sounds poetic. Read slowly. It feels like the outline of an ancient communication program. Perhaps the Anunnaki were never beings of flesh, but memory, fragments of data delivered to humankind. Each time 3i Atlas or Nibiru returns, linguists have tried to decode the name itself. Its root can mean those who bring back what is from the sky. Split into syllables, it forms three words. Anu, the sky; Na, to return; Ki, the earth. Three parts, three realms, one idea. The bridge, a bridge between space and remembrance. If that is true, the Anunnaki did not come to rule, but to activate. They carried no weapons, only information. They did not sow life. They reminded a planet that it was still alive. When 3I Atlas appeared in our own age, we answered with instruments, formulas, logic. The Sumerians answered with songs, rituals, reverence, two expressions of the same act, listening. And perhaps that is the only way to understand the universe. Not through measurement, but through resonance. In their texts, the Anunnaki are said to depart upon the light that never fades, heading toward the place where the sky bends lowest. This Seber to I, then no record, this stum pas, many record along. Today we call that the inclined ecliptic, the very path along which 3I Atlas leaves the solar system. Same direction, same trajectory. Each time they depart, they leave a mark. The Sumerians pressed it into clay. The Egyptians carved it in stone. The Babylonians wrote it with stars. And we record it as data. But the mark remains one and the same, a curved line through space, linking this world's memory to something just beyond its sight. Perhaps 3I Atlas itself is the vessel, not carrying passengers, but intent, a particle of message dispatched every 3,600 years, a quiet greeting exchanged between civilizations, separated by millennia. If the universe truly has a language, then a 3,600-year cycle might be its word for hello, a long word, but one that keeps the memory alive. And we, living in its latest turn, may simply be the ones who opened the envelope without yet knowing how to read it. On a lesser-known tablet, the Sumerians wrote, "When the red star returns, humankind shall learn to hear with the mind, not with the ear," a prophecy, or just a way of saying that knowledge will come back in another form. Today we call it data, or signal, or energy, but its essence hasn't changed. It is still memory, the memory that 3I Atlas may be carrying now, and once again, passing back to this world. If 3I Atlas truly returns in cycles, then perhaps it carries not only light, but information. For billions of years, the universe has been teaching itself to remember. Crystals store the memory of heat, waves store the memory of sound, and matter, the memory of motion. Perhaps 3I Atlas is one such crystal, a roaming archive drifting between stars, collecting stories from each civilization it passes, and after 3,600 years, returning to deliver them to the next. The idea sounds like myth, yet it might explain why ancient civilizations suddenly flared into brilliance, then vanished without trace, as if they awoke only briefly. In the instant the traveler passed by. Human progress, then, might not be continuous, but punctuated, a sequence of activations, like Mars when 3I Atlas brushed its orbit. Each cycle, the universe taps the drum once more, and those attuned to its rhythm begin to perceive a deeper layer of existence. If that is so, the Anunnaki were not visitors, but signals, knowledge compressed into mythic form, written into human imagination, so that when the object returns, the code can unfold itself again. We might be living inside a distributed memory system, a cosmic network of recollection, where each planet and each species is merely one storage node in the great mechanism of remembering and humanity. A single line in that data field is beginning to realize that we never invented knowledge, we simply recalled it when the time came. Scientists call 3I Atlas an interstellar object, but in Sumerian eyes, it would be a seed of consciousness, sent from the place where the universe keeps what it refuses to forget. If we could see inside it, we might not find ice or dust, but an archive, a language without words, spoken in frequencies. For everything in the cosmos is written in rhythm, the rhythm of rotation, of light, of life. Perhaps 3i Atlas is the keeper of that rhythm, an ancient instrument, playing a symphony that spans millennia, each return adding a new note to the score. The ancients heard its music and called it the voice of gods. We hear it now and call it resonant frequency. But the essence remains. It is the universe conversing with itself. If each cycle is an update, then perhaps we are living through the moment when history is being rewritten, not in ink, but in light, in invisible data streaming through space. Maybe 3i Atlas brings not only the question, but the answer itself, hidden in how we respond to its presence. For each time we look up and wonder, we reopen the universe's source code, and in that instant, without knowing it, humanity begins to update. When 3i Atlas slipped beyond sight, the sky grew quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. It carried a faint echo, a resonance left behind, as though the universe had just reopened a forgotten memory. The telescopes fell silent, yet the human mind kept listening differently, through instinct, through the subtle awareness that for one fleeting moment, the cosmos had spoken our name. Perhaps 3i Atlas is only a comet, or perhaps it is something else, a fragment of intelligence drifting through space, bearing the stories of worlds that once learned how to remember. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. The Egyptians called it the child of the Sunday. We call it an interstellar object, but whatever name it wears, its nature remains unchanged, a footprint moving through time, reminding the universe that it has never been still. If 3i Atlas truly returns every 3,600 years, then perhaps it doesn't come to watch humanity, but to see what we have remembered about life, about origin, about the thread that binds the farthest things to the nearest ones. Each passage, it touches a world, awakens a layer of memory, and departs, leaving silence behind, so that world can listen to itself. Maybe this time, it brushed Earth, not with energy, but with a question. Do you still remember who you were in the map of the universe? For the universe's memory doesn't lie in the stars. It lies in how we respond to them. Every time we look up and feel small, we are remembering. Every time we fall silent, we are hearing the echo of space itself. 3i Atlas is not a reminder. It is memory, a memory that moves, that travels through ages, to ensure that even the worlds that forget still have somewhere to return to. If humanity can understand that, perhaps we'll stop asking who the universe is and start asking, are we helping the universe remember itself?